Well, hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Women Like Me Stories and Business. I am your host, Julie Fairhurst, and today we have a lady who is just full of a wealth of information. I'm so excited to get into this conversation with her. Let me tell you a little bit about her. So, her name is Erin Herman, and she's a bold speaker, leadership strategist, and an unapologetic people expert dedicated to helping women lead with confidence. With over 2 decades of experience driving global impact at the United Nations and St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, Erin has created initiatives like the Learning Passport. So I definitely want to hear more about that. It's a digital educational platform developed with Microsoft and the Cambridge University, now reaching children in over 40 countries. So that sounds amazing. Her signature CEG method, focusing on courage, empathy, and growth mindset, guides leaders to embrace change, fostering psychological safety, and cultivates cultures where innovation thrives. So Erin's mission is to transform leadership by making it more human, courageous, and impactful. Holy smokes, girl. Well, welcome, Erin. Thank you so much for being here. Would you like to tell our audience anything else about yourself?
I'm just thrilled to be here today and engage in this conversation with you. So look forward to diving right in.
Perfect. Well, thank you. Okay, so CEG method. So that emphasizes courage, empathy, and
Mhm.
growth mindset. So how do you help women to apply these principles?
Sure. We as women leaders, I think oftentimes we are concerned about perceptions. And I always say we need to stop being focused on perceptions and be really mindful to the impact. And in order to get to that impact piece, I talk about the KEG method, and it starts with courage, right? So it's courage to identify on these large teams with evolving priorities. Hey, what's working and what's not working? Let's identify both sides of the house. And then it's the element of empathy to really understand that two-way feedback, right? That's going to come from your teams when you're identifying what's working and what's not. And then there's the growth element there, which helps teams to embrace what they want to change, what they want to tackle, and it removes the shame in the process of that acknowledgement element. And so when you put all three of those components together, and helps to elevate the performance of the team, but it also shapes you as a leader. And I've seen just brilliant strategies and implementation across several Fortune 500 companies with it. And it's very successful.
Wow. So are you working mainly with teams then, or are you working with the leader and the team to the side? How does that work?
Great question. So when I started my career, I started out in elevators and escalators. I was quite literally paid to help people move up in the world. And then when I went on to work for the United Nations Children's Fund and lead their corporate partnership team, our pretense there was really to focus on what are the most pressing challenges that are affecting children globally. So we would go into Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 companies, and we would iterate around what are sustainable and scalable solutions that we could put in place. From there, when I went on to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, ALSAC, very similar line of work. We were looking at corporate partnership engagement and supporting children, but obviously on a domestic front with a health focus. Since then, I've broken out away from both Fortune 500 organizations and have stepped into my own keynote business where I support corporate social responsibility strategy. I speak on topics around women playing big in the workspace, around change management, around self assurance as a superpower, and around creating positive failure cultures. And then, as an enhancement to those keynotes, I also help organizations really land those messages with their employees by running facilitation workshops. And those can be spaced out from, right after the keynote, right before the keynote, or, on a monthly cadence or semi-annual basis, just to really help deliver and drive those messages home.
Wow. What do you think is the biggest thing that stops women from playing big? What do you think that is?
I talk a lot about imposter syndrome. And,
Ah,
oftentimes I look at the data doesn't lie, right? So men will apply for a job or a role when they meet 60% of the qualifications in AJD. Whereas women will not apply for that same role unless they feel that they meet 100% of those qualifications. And for me, that ties back to imposter syndrome, right? And oftentimes women come up and they say, "Gosh, I just feel like I'm continuing to fake it till I make it." But really, when we peel back the layers of imposter syndrome or what holds women back, that that element is really wrapped up in a system that wasn't designed for women in the first place. And, I think about imposter syndrome is really a response to external invalidation from peers, from workplaces. And so the more that we can move women away from permission language, so simple micronisms like I think versus ownership language of I recommend. And through those micro nuances, we start to elevate ourselves in the workplace. We elevate our titles. I tell women to do performance audits and job audits. So oftentimes, if you look at women, we're running two or three different roles in the workplace. We're, the employee counselor, we're running event management, we're leading teams, we're playing all these different hats, but we're paid for one out of those three roles. But we're expected to cover a multitude of facets and capabilities within those roles. So I say, look at your job qualifications. Make sure that you're doing exactly what you need to be doing and doing it really well. Make sure your title aligns with your responsibilities. Oftentimes, we see women are given a managerial title, but they're doing director work, right? And so we need to advocate for ourselves. And I think it starts from early onset. I have a daughter, and one time my daughter, her name's May, came up to me and she said, "Mom," she was 7 at the time. She said, "Mom, I know women can be bosses. Can men be bosses too?" And it's so eye-opening to me because what we teach young girls and women through educational institutions all the way up is what
Yeah.
they will believe about themselves. And
Yes.
so it sits with us.
Wow. You speak about the importance of creating a failure positive culture.
Hmm.
So, how does embracing failure contribute to a person's personal and professional growth?
Hmm. Yeah, when people are afraid to fail, it is really just and oftentimes that's covered up with perfectionism. And I will say I am a recovering perfectionist to the T. But when I think about it, it's really just that perfectionism is fear wearing a mask, right? And so when we can be vulnerable with ourselves and with our teams and authentic, and we're not afraid of mistakes, but instead we embrace those mistakes, we build trust and validity and credibility quicker than any other mechanism in the workplace. And I oftentimes, teams will say after I give my creating positive failure keynote speech, they'll say, "Well, how do we do that, Erin? What does that look like?"
Hmm.
And it can be as simple as creating, I talk about micro wins, right? So every project, every initiative that comes down the pipe, figure out what went well and figure out what didn't go well and celebrate both of those. Because if you only have 50% of the equation, you're never going to solve for the answer. And oftentimes, when we learn to embrace failure, when we celebrate those challenges, that teaches teams resilience. And it also teaches them the reward to take the risk. So it's so important that we reward the risk taking. That's how you elevate the performance of your team.
I love that. Reward the risk taking. And I think that even women who are just leaders of their own businesses, they're not necessarily maybe leaders of large corporate teams, but that is just so important, embracing it, because really failure is learning.
Hmm. Hmm.
And it's not something that it's something we should learn and then enhance and then grow from, not allow it to, make us want to stay in bed that day with the blankets over our head.
Right, right. Yeah, one
Yeah.
thing, I talk about is just pressure testing assumptions, right? Think about something as simple as assumptions that we make. And we do this in our personal relationships, we do this in our relationships with colleagues. But I say, hey, 30 minutes a day, sit down with your team and say, hey, everyone, we're going to get in and we're going to pressure test the assumptions that we all made this week, right? Because when we do that, we realize so many false narratives we created. We realize so many things that we jump to conclusion on. We talk past one another instead of with one another. And what that does is it creates the opportunity for pivots instead of panics to ultimately be made. And that is so helpful when you're talking about creating a positive failure culture.
Wow, that's just, that's a lot of what women learn in writing their stories because that's what we do, women like me. And it's so true because once they sit down and they start to get it out of the body and get it on paper in front of them, they can see what was just a perception that was necessarily not
Mhm.
true and holding them back for years based on that perception.
Right, right.
Wow, that
Yep.
was brilliant. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Sure.
Can we talk about the learning passport? I'm really
Mhm.
curious about that. What is that all about?
Yeah. This was back very onset of my career at UNICEF, but we were looking at the time at the refugee crisis and we were looking at specifically children on the move. So if I was a young, let's say, seventh grade girl in Syria and my parents were moving to Jordan and we were going to be going to a refugee camp there. Well, my parents don't speak the native language. They don't possess the appropriate papers to put me in the formal education system within Jordan. And there's so many hurdles, right, for young men and women to be able to have that continuity within their learning journey.
Mhm.
And so we sat down in a boardroom with Microsoft and Cambridge University, and we started iterating around the fact of this gap in learning for refugee children on the move. And so through that iteration and several sessions, we came up with the concept of the learning passport. And so what that looks like now is it's an online and offline digital learning platform. So if I do eventually go to Jordan and I'm in a refugee camp, I can still pick up in my native language, in my native education, and I can have that continuous education so that I can move grade levels and ultimately obtain a high school diploma and become a productive member of society. And for me, it just really speaks to the fact that education is essential for opportunity in life for anyone. It doesn't matter male, female, young, or old. When you have education, it unlocks opportunities. And that is really the pretense. And then during COVID, when so many countries'
Mm.
primary education systems shut down, it was actually pivoted to become the primary learning platform in country for several different countries so that kids could continue their learning journeys from home and not miss out on a year, 2 years, in some instances, even 3 years of education.
Beautiful. So is that still, so are people still using that today? No,
Mhm.
I'm not necessarily meaning I guess I'm meaning more North America. Are we still using that for kids
Mm.
that maybe want to, some kids don't do well in the school system or in that environment. So is that learning passport still available?
It's available in over 40 countries, but not within the US. It is not up and running in the US. It is an international global education tool.
Okay.
Mhm.
Wow. That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Wow. Okay, so let's talk about balancing roles for women because, and you mentioned it earlier on about how we can do three different jobs and we're only getting paid for one, but at the end of the day, they go home as well.
Sure,
And
sure.
they might have a spouse and they might have children or they might have elderly parents. So how can we balance multiple roles and still stay effective in leadership and helping others?
I love this question, and I think this is one of the most underrated topics, but it is of the utmost importance because women, you're absolutely right. We play multiple hats and wear multiple roles within our organizations, but then we come home and we're met with even more. And you can wake up at 8 in the morning and you've got your day planned, and by 8:15, once you've gotten your kids to school and you're dressed and ready to roll, your day's completely shifted in that 15-minute period. And so What I really encourage women to do, and I think this is such a unique topic, but I encourage women to get sponsors. And this is different than mentors, right? So, mentors are going to teach you the ins and outs, maybe within your professional careers. But when you have a sponsor, it puts names in rooms that you're currently not in. And that is across the board. It could be in friendship circles, it could be in neighborhood communities, it could be in religious settings, it could be, in the workplace. But those sponsors, they help you to identify the difference between being a weak-minded mom and career goer and a strong-minded mom and grower. Because weak people will find other people's weaknesses and critique them or make fun of them or condemn them. Whereas strong-minded women, we will identify other people's strengths and we'll learn from them, or we'll be able to switch the ideation of envy to admiration. And when more women can start to admire other women for how they show up, or even that they're showing up amidst the chaos and the struggle, we start to elevate one another and we celebrate that and we learn from one another. And I think it's so important within that entire setting to be strong-minded. You have to recognize your vulnerabilities. You have to recognize, hey, the struggles or the challenges or the areas in which you fell short that day. Because when you have that recognition, you teach other women that it's okay and that you figured it out. And the last thing I would just say is prioritize yourself in the journey. We are so good at prioritizing our husbands, our kids, our employees, our teams. But if we don't start with ourselves, we will be a shell of what we could truly become. And that's a choice, just like a choice to care for your kids, just like a choice to go to the gym, just like a choice to cook dinner. So take those moments and don't think of them as being selfish. They're a necessary growth tool and resource for you to be successful.
Thank you so much for saying that because I believe that we selfish has gotten a bad rap.
Mhm.
And it is so important because if we're not healthy, we cannot pass down healthiness to never
Mhm.
mind people in our workplace that might possibly be looking to us as a leader, but we can't do that to our own families
Right.
and to our
Right.
children and also to our daughters. I think that sometimes we think of ourselves as being a martyr, or maybe we don't even think of it, but we can't help it. But just because that's what we women do. We're out there
Mhm.
saving the world, but eventually we burn out.
Mhm.
And then we're
Mhm.
no good to anybody.
Right. Right.
Yeah. It's just so important for people to realize that self-care should be number one.
Yeah. And I think it's actually such a blessing. I think about a long time ago, I was involved in a bad car accident and I wanted to start lifting weights. I had all these neck problems. And, for the first year, I would go and I would lift weights every single day. And I felt really guilty about after work being gone for an hour from my kids and just not being there. And then one day, both my daughter and my son said, Mom, can we come to the gym with you? Can we start lifting weights with you? And I thought, wow, even in the most indirect moments where I feel like I am being selfish, my kids are watching, but they're seeing it from a different lens. And it
Yes.
forced me to realize we all have the same reality, but we have two different ways in which to look at it. And so when I started to look at it from more of a gracious and, really from a lens of gratitude, I was
Mhm.
able to realize the positive influences that we can have on others and indirectly and directly.
Absolutely. I don't talk about this very often, but many, many years ago, I was not doing well in the beginning of my life. And I did have my three boys, and I was a single mom, and I was broke, not doing well at all. And so I knew that I had two choices. One choice was to stay there and be there for my kids, be there when they got up in the morning, be there when they went to school, be there when they got home, just be there for them. But the other option was to show them that that's not reality sometimes when
Mhm.
you have to eat, when you
Right.
have a rent to pay, when you need clothes. So I chose very not happily about it, to go into the workforce. And I thought, I can show my kids those two things, but really, what is more important to me to show them, rather than we get up in the morning, we go to our work, we get paid, and this is how we grow and live and take care of ourselves
Mhm.
and our families. And that was really tough for me for a long time. That was really, and I had so much guilt about it. And then I realized that, just like what you were saying with your kids and lifting the weights, my kids were working at like 16, 15 years old.
Mhm. Mhm.
And again, there was a lot of pain around that because, I was out there. I wasn't there all the time for them.
Right.
And but that was important to show them.
And I love that because it truly does. I think in those moments, I'm writing a book right now, and one of the things I was writing on was my dad and the fact that, he never had a college degree. He never was formally educated, and yet he has run so many successful companies and he has gotten knocked down probably more times than I can
Mm.
count. And in some of those instances, I truly thought, okay, you broke him. This is it. And he would bounce back every single time. And I think what it taught me, very similar to probably what you taught your children, was you can literally build back from anything. You can build back better from any situation, from anything that has come your way. And resilience isn't, built overnight. It's just built by consistency. And when you have that mindset, you teach kids, work hard. You can be anything you want to be. The world is truly your oyster. And man, when you have that belief, it is just beautiful to see your kids come
Oh,
up and see what they can accomplish. And
oh, I
it's
got
a beautiful
shivers.
story what you've taught your kids.
Oh, thank you. You just gave me shivers. That was just, I want to, when you're done the book, let me know. I want to get your book. I want to get it.
That's great.
Okay, so let's move on a little bit. What advice do you have for women who would are looking to make a career pivot into leadership positions?
I love that question. You know, I think we as women in particular, we are really good at saying, we'll get to that tomorrow, or we will prioritize ourselves when the opportunity presents itself. And, a couple years ago, I was really at the crux of massive change in my life. And I realized that simple sentence that I was saying to myself, that I'll get to my passion or my career choice that really resonates with me tomorrow, I realized there's no better day than the present. And I was literally giving myself, I was doing self-limiting talk, which is one of the most destructive things you can do to yourself as a female and as a leader. So, what we tell ourselves is truly what we will become. People read
Mhm.
a lot about manifesting, they read a lot
Mhm.
about, self-help books, but we can be our biggest champion just by simply advocating for ourselves. So,
Yeah.
I say two things to this. I say, learn to say no is a complete sentence. We need to say no. We need to say no more often than we say yes in certain situations to help create boundaries and space for us to be able to make
Mhm.
appropriate decisions that serve us and our growth in whatever element of our lives that is. And we need to do that without shame or guilt. The other thing that we need to do is believe in ourselves. And everyone says, "Oh, that's so cliche," and that's just something that happens inevitably. But uh, empowerment to me is twofold. It doesn't mean redistribution. It means inspiration, and no one else is going to inspire yourself other than you. And we do that by what we tell ourselves, what we take on, and who we become. And I can't emphasize enough to women, there is no better time than the present to figure out what inspires you, to figure out what empowers you, and to pursue it. Because in 80 years, when you look back, you're going to remember those moments that you took the biggest risks because oftentimes they have the best rewards. And my experiences have not led me astray yet. And so I just can't emphasize that enough for women.
I love what you just said, your gut, your intuition. We need to listen to that a little bit more instead of up here. Because sometimes
Hmm.
up here, we get all confused and we get mumbled jumbled, and that imposter syndrome sneaks in. But when
Right.
we listen to our intuition, 99% of the time, it's leading us in that right direction.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, think about anything in life. I think that inner voice can be so strong, and oftentimes I think we're taught to turn that volume down. We want to fit in. We want to be seen as being perfect or being polished, but really we should set the expectation on our teams and in society to reward risks, to
Yes.
reward bravery, to reward authenticity. Sometimes I think we have to think about our value system. And I also talk about the fact that we spend so much of our time in our lives trying to convince others that may have a different value system than us to believe in ours. And we throw energy at it, we throw conversation at it. But what we need to realize is we're not here to convince others of our worth, of our own unique value systems. We're here to have that self-assurance, to believe in our own values, our own ideas, our own ways of working, and then exude the confidence and the self-assurance to believe those at all costs. And when we do that, you create this really beautiful tie of authenticity to who you are and what you believe in. And it helps you to navigate those bigger and broader challenges that life throws at you in a really clear and succinct way.
Wow. That's thank you for that. Thank you for that. You are just I said in the beginning, wealth of information, and I was right. I knew it. I knew it. Erin, I have a few questions that I like to ask my podcast guests. Would you mind if I asked you a few?
Sure,
It's
sure.
just a way that we can all get to know you a little bit better. Okay, so my first question is, if you could travel anywhere in the world tomorrow, where would you go and why would you go there?
Hmm. Boy, my husband and I always talk about this. It's my favorite topic to discuss. We actually just made a travel list. I think next on our list, I'd like to go to the United Arab Emirates and just do a little bit more immersive cultural deep dive there, see all of the um, history and the cities, and just I don't know. Dubai's been on the top of my list for a long time, so that'd probably be next for us
Ah,
to.
I'd love to go to Dubai. Beautiful. Do you have a favorite book that inspires you?
Hmm. Gosh, a lot of them.
Good.
I think, for me, the, I don't think I could pick just one, to be honest. I love self-help books. I love Brene Brown. I love,
Mm,
any book that really gets you to think about. I've read several about imposter syndrome. There's just so many different topics. For me, it's really about the topics that I want to uncover around. I've read things about attachment styles, about avoidant versus anxious attachment styles. How does that sync up in the workplace? How does self-assurance work to be your superpower? All of these things, teaching women to play big, all of these elements that I think we hear, but how do we make it applicable and how do we let that guide really be our mouthpiece in our day-to-day lives? And so I'd say any self-help book, I've probably got it on my nightstand and I'm probably taking a deep dive into it. I probably can't pick just one.
yeah, I agree. I think that it's anything that we can pick up that helps us, helps lift
Hmm.
us up, helps us get get out of that shrinking place that we tend to live in, for sure.
Right.
Okay, if you could have dinner with any woman in history, who would you have dinner with and why?
Mm, gosh, that's a great question too. I'd probably love to have dinner with Rosa Parks. And the reason I would like to have dinner with her is I'd love to hear how she felt during a time that I can only imagine the feelings that she must have felt and what was going on within her situation that I find to be so inspiring, such a catalyst for our society, and truly something that I idealize the stance that she took and how she
Hmm.
handled it. And I think those are the moments in history that I know I personally will always remember. And when I think about people who inspire me, who, uh, you know, are my motivation to be bigger and to be bolder and to create a more inclusive world, she's top of mind. And so I'd love to just sit down with her, have dinner, pick her brain, and thank her.
Ah, perfect. Okay, my last question. If you could whisper one truth into the ear of every woman who's struggling right now, what would you say?
Mm. Yeah, I would say you are worthy. We don't hear it enough from spouses, friends, kids,
Hmm.
ourselves. And I think it's so important. I try and tell my girlfriends all the time, you are so worthy of love, of admiration, of success, of everything that is good and can come your way. And when we believe it, we start to feel it. And so I would just say you are worthy.
Oh, that's beautiful. And you're right. So women need to hear that. I don't know why we, you know, don't think we're as worthy as we should be, but that's just, yeah, what we do. So
Mhm.
that's a great message. So, everyone, if you want to reach out to Erin, you will be able to find all of the links to find her in the details section of the video and, of course, of the YouTube or the podcast and the video. So, Erin, I just have really loved this conversation. Thank you so much for doing this. We just need to lift each other up. And I love these because I get to be lifted up by all of the women that I get to interview. So I appreciate it so much. Would you like to share anything at all in closing?
Mm. First, I just want to thank you for your time, Julie. I really enjoyed today's conversation. I love listening to your podcast. I always find it so inspirational, motivational, eye-opening. There's always a topic that just seems to resonate. So, for that, thank you. And for your audience, I'm just really grateful and gracious for you taking the time to listen. Please do reach out if I can ever be a resource, a mentor, a friend, an opportunity to connect and speak within your organizations about any of the topics. Again, I would just feel immense gratitude, and I look forward to meeting a lot of your listening base. So thank you.
Oh, well, thank you so much. Okay, wow, I filled up. I got filled up with some lots of good stuff. So I hope all of you did as well. And thank you once again, Erin, for doing this. And we will see all of you on the next episode of Women Like Me Stories in Business.